Hello and welcome to Deft and Dorky. We're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. I'm
Yes.
Brian again, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
talk about some Dungeons and Dragons stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we are talking about character development / growth and risk taking. So, I have a couple things to say about that, but where do you have a jumping off point you want to start with?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I feel like this. I play this game for storytelling, and I don't think that stories are told about things that don't grow or change. So I feel like there's a lot of
Okay.
ways to go this way. Like, I also like playing games, so it's fun to roll dice and stuff like that. But it's like a big thing that appeals to me about this game is that component. But jump away. If you have jumping off points, let's jump.
Okay. So as far as like character development and growth, one of the things I wanted to sort of touch on was when you are doing like going back and forth with your DM about your backstory. Do you have an idea of where you want to where you want to go with your character as far as anything, but like maybe about like personality or personal things that they want to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit in past sessions, like the idea of like having a place to go
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, and like I think that there's kind of like a shared control over that between DM and player. Like I don't know that it's. I mean, you play whatever you want to play, right? But like for me, I don't want to be like, hey DM, I want to enact Star Wars Episode 4. So I really need you to make the bad guy my father. It's like, okay. And like, I know everyone's like, that didn't happen until episode 5. It's like, whatever, shut up.
You have to push your glasses up when you say that.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, um, uh, if that's what you guys want to do, that's cool. Like, do whatever you want to do. But for me personally, I think most people, there's a collaborative effort. I think a lot of DMs like to have their own story that they reveal to the players or whatever. Um, but I do think that it's important that like I love this idea of ideals, bonds, and flaws, and using that to kind of serve as like cornerstones of your character development. Keeping in mind that like these flaws may be further ingrained or worked on and improved. Bonds may fade or strengthen, and ideals may like be hardened or loosened. You know what I mean? Like in our current campaign, something like keeps kind of coming up, and I've realized is like my character has more fully embraced some of his flaws. Like got brought up tonight. Like I can't remember. It was like you drink a lot, and I'm like, yeah, I have. Like during this thing, my dad's died in an in that word in Magnus. I can't. I'll have to look it up. In not so great a way. Uh, my brother's disappeared. My other brother joined the thing that I hate, and that's conflicting. And luckily, I got my mom back or whatever. Like, I think that it's probably good to have a conversation about like ways that things could go so that you're not just like dropping something in your player's lap that is not what they intended. Like, oh yeah, like this seems crazy. Did you have an idea where you wanted to go with that, or like, are you okay if I just run with it? Because, you know, like for example, in my in-person game, my wife has a perfect opportunity for us to like explore something in her backstory related to like her whole village disappeared, and I was like, hey, this could be like really ugly. Are you okay with that? And how do you think that you would respond / your player would respond? And so we kind of fleshed that out from the standpoint of like, you know, hey, what you wrote here usually doesn't mean good things. So, like, is that all right if
Sunshine
we
and
kind of run with
rainbows.
that? Yeah, exactly. So,
Okay. Um, yeah, I think that like just having a general idea of, or at least if you have a general idea of where you for sure want to go with it, fill your DM in.
Yeah.
And another thing that I think is important for like development and growth is to make sure you have an idea or to make sure that you are thinking of ways that your character wants to be with the party, right? Because every time you write a backstory, it's sometimes you do, but very rarely are you going to know everyone else in the party from the get-go, right?
Yeah.
So and in order for you to be able to attach to them, you have to be somewhat of a loner, right? Because otherwise you would be attached to something else. So I think that just giving thought to not to why am I staying here, but why will I stay here?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're playing this sort of like lone wolf character, in every session you're like, it would make sense if my character just left. That's gonna start to get weird. So I feel like at least for me, a big part of like writing your character is what attachments is my character going to have to stay with this group? Why does he care to stay with this? Why should I want to stay with this group? And finding those reasons, even if I have to make them myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a kind of important thing, because if everyone is doing their own individual superhero story, it's not as conducive to a party.
Yeah.
So that's something I talk about.
I mean, like, it's funny because, like, as players, like, oh, we're playing a game, so we'll just kind of overlook this. But it can make some roleplay moments feel, like, forced or inauthentic. If it's just like, oh, you know, like, we're hanging out because otherwise this game doesn't work.
Yeah.
But, like, one thing that I told my in-person group when they were writing their backstories, I was like, I need all of you to have a reason that you're connected to this guy. This like NPC, because he's integral to this like campaign, and it's like this is a super easy way for you guys to know each other as well, and it's kind of like made it happen from the jump, which is kind of nice. Like, I'll tell you this: the next time that I play, I really want to consider writing a character with another player, because like having a pre-existing relationship that's really fleshed out, I think would be really entertaining.
Yeah. That's the thing that I sort of feel like can be a double-edged sword. And this is something I kind of noticed in the newest campaign from Critical Role. You have all like these, basically everyone came with a buddy. Mm-hmm. And they almost, like, it's gotten more cohesive over time, but when they first got there, it was basically like 3 sets of 2 were doing this, right? And they weren't having that connection already there. It seemed like it almost stunted their growth to the rest of the party in a way,
as like a whole unit. Sure.
Yeah, it was almost like, well, and I know that they wouldn't do this because I've watched their games, but like it sometimes felt like, well, if things go bad, you and me can bail.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, that feels not great to me. I would rather have where everyone has builds reasons to stay together. Sure. It's more, I don't know, it feels more authentic that way for me, because otherwise, like you said, it's like, well, the game stops if we don't go together, so I guess we'll stay together.
Like like Baldur's Gate 3 fans out there, like there is like from the get-go, like a plot device that ensures like, well, we are all in this same boat and we might as well do it in numbers for these characters. Like, all of us have this potentially like deathly thing in our brains.
Mm-hmm.
We might as well like it's a very unifying force that forces them all to work together.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that there's clearly like strong differences in like moral relativism between all of the party members, but
Mm-hmm.
and
And
none of them know each other,
yeah,
right?
and one of the things I like about Baldur's Gate is that it does start that way, where they're all basically very separate and brought together by this one thing, but
Hmm.
very quickly, like those bonds start to get made between even characters that you're not playing.
Right.
Some of the bonds go the opposite way, which is interesting because it's a video game. But like Lae'zel
Right.
and Shadowheart, at some point, they, if you're depending on how your game goes, they can like try to kill each other.
Yeah.
But then
And
you have people
successfully
like
do so.
yeah, and then you have people like Karlach and Will who actually become friends and are like enemies at the beginning. So I think that that dynamic is cool of being able to find common ground that's not just the intro reason. Like things were built
Right.
upon.
Yeah, I forgot that Karlach and Will actually knew each other from before. But yeah. 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 I think having that like why I would bother to stick around or like weaving something in, like a unifying purpose, is super important. Because otherwise it could feel like I mean we had an instance in this campaign, like one of our players' characters died and they rolled up a new one and we just kind of like found him on the side of the road. And it's like, well, sure, why don't you come with us? Okay, I'm gonna go with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we've talked a little bit about that sort of thing before, whereas like both you and I have had characters that have come in mid-campaign, and I feel like both of us tried to like actively make a story that would invite the party to bring us in and not just be like, oh, there's this random guy.
Yeah.
I guess he'll come with
Absolutely.
us. And I mean, I think that that's far more interesting too, and not just for a like ease of entry, just because there's more going on.
Yeah. I think so character development because when we were talking about this before, I do remember being like, yeah, I think growth is important, but I feel like growth intonates. Wow, my brain today. Well, there's a connotation that that's like a positive thing, and I don't think that that's necessarily always going to be the case or necessarily good. You know what I mean? Like I think it is very interesting for people to like fail and slip and I think that that's something else to keep in mind as well. Is like your character goes through all this stuff. Like normal people would encounter D&D adventures and probably eventually lose their minds. Like go insane with like the horrors that they face, the constant like at least the traumas that they would continuously experience. And they're just like, yeah, we're just gonna kind of keep going. It's fine.
We're adventurers.
We're adventurers. PTSD is our life. So
Yeah, and you're talking about like I don't know why that sort of reminded me of a thing that I do in Michael's campaign, which is I had given myself I'd give myself claustrophobia in that campaign.
oh really?
Yeah. So
Interesting.
anytime like there's a too tight of a squeeze, I make my character roll a wisdom save, and if he fails it, he basically like freaks out, backs out, and like has to sit and chill until until the feeling passes, and then he can try again. But like it came up, it hasn't come up in an emergency yet, but it did come up one time where I was supposed to go in and like follow someone into this cave, and I failed the save, and I was like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I had to like sit and chill for a minute.
Does the rest of the party know about it?
I mean, they do now.
They do
well,
now,
not
but, like-
now, but they did whenever I did that.
Yeah. They learned that you have a problem with it at that point.
Yeah.
I think that's cool. Like tying that in mechanically to have like a thing that. Do you think that your character will like outgrow that?
I haven't decided. I sort of made it become a thing because I wrote into the basically I made it to where it came from him as a child, like hiding in a place that was sort of snug and getting stuck. and
Yeah.
it like took a while to get out, and it was a bad time, so that became a thing for him. And then as we sort of did it, it came up. Like I was like, "Is this
Yeah.
like pretty tight?" And Michael's like, "Yeah, it's real tight. You're gonna have to really hunker down." I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna roll a wisdom save."
Yeah.
and I don't know if like there are certainly things that he has overcome, like because part of the reason he left where he was going is because he found out that his like father figure slash mob boss, he watched him kill someone, and he's like, I can't be here for this. This is more than I thought was going on. And so he was sort of like very became, because D&D is combat. It's a combat game essentially, so you have to do that. So when we first started out, I was like, I mean, I'll attack back if I get attacked, but slowly over time he's sort of become more aggressive, and I'm thinking about having him go, like at some point go back to that his father figure and be like, I'm ready to take over.
Yeah. That's cool.
So I don't know if that'll happen or not, but like it's certainly it is a direction that could happen.
Yeah. And I guess I should say too, like, for people that really actually struggle with these things, I don't mean to say like, are you gonna get over it? You know? But thinking of the ways that your character, or like that you'd want to experience that like development, I think it's important. It's like, are you gonna get over this phobia? That's not what I intended to say, but it definitely came out that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know what you meant, like, because I've thought about it being like someone very important to him. He has to deal with it right then, or that person is either dead or severely injured, and that could be like if that sort of thing happens, that could definitely be a turning point that makes it to where he doesn't have to make that saving throw every time, essentially.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
where he still doesn't necessarily like it, but he's found it within himself to deal with it if the situation is dire.
Like you mentioned that you like developed addiction mechanics for like a potential campaign, and I think that would be super interesting to like I find that idea of that narrative interesting to like run down, and like that right there is a great example of like, is your character going to move through that, or like hold on to that at the cost of his own well-being and that of the party? Like, I think that would be kind of an interesting developmental kind of thing to look at too. And these are interesting things too, because like I think a lot of times this topic that we're talking about, like growth and development, like these are not the plot hooks that many campaigns are going to be anchored around.
Yeah.
But they are like some of the more meaningful things to me that you would experience in some of these stories you tell, like.
Yeah, they're definitely very interesting for me. It's one of those things where like obviously you're going to have the whatever overarching plot, but I feel like if you don't at least try to touch on the more personal things of your players' characters, especially if they're open to it, then it feels more one-dimensional.
Yeah, it'll feel like, oh yeah, we killed the bad guy. Cool.
Yeah, it feels like it feels more like you're playing a game rather than role playing.
Yes, exactly. Because I mean, like, I feel like sometimes I think about that. Like, you have people like Sir Alec Guinness that played again Star Wars, but Obi-Wan in the first ones, and like that guy, like he took a sci-fi film that he did not believe in. Like, why did he do that? And it's like, I'm sure it's like, well, okay, none of this is actually about like lightsabers and the Empire and all this stuff. What it's really about is like family, overcoming adversity, like standing up to oppression. Like, these are things that we all deal with and relate to, and it's sometimes more powerful to experience it by like holding it up against a contextual background of like something that's completely unrelated. Like, like I don't want to hear a story about somebody doing this in real life. I want to go do some escapism, but those threads are still there, and like because it is like in this galaxy far, far away, long time ago, whatever. I am more willing to open the door of my heart to that because it's not like real.
Yeah, that's what
You know
like
what I
the
mean?
the best sci-fi does that, right?
Yeah.
It's taking a modern day problem and cloaking it in something that's fictional so that you don't go, "Hey, wait a minute." You're like, "Oh."
Yeah. And I think that's true. Like, there's only like what, like 20 something unique original stories, but we like keep
Yeah.
going back to like fantasy and sci-fi and Marvel nonsense and all that. But it's like it's all the same stories over and over again.
Mhm.
So just
Yeah, it's dependent on like whether or not it's good. For me, it depends on uh, the character development and world building.
yeah, yeah, definitely, absolutely.
That's one of the things
Oh,
like for a lot of modern media is, and I think that this is not. I think this is a pretty popular opinion, but whenever a show or movie creates its own rules for how its world works and then breaks them, that's when most people are like, whatever with this.
yeah,
why give me those rules if you're not gonna like abide by them?
yeah. Like, oh, now you're just bringing people back to life. Great. Why didn't you just do that earlier? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Screw that stuff.
uh, you also wanted to talk about a little bit about risk taking. Do you think? Because this, I've gone back and forth on this. Because at some point, I'm like, I kind of agree with the sentiment that you never regret the things that you tried
Yeah,
versus passing on. But at the same time, it's sometimes that can get things unnecessarily messy.
yeah,
So where do you think that balance is?
yeah. That's hard. I mean, like, so we've talked about Critical Role a couple times tonight and before. Like, I am impressed with their willingness to just like, you do whatever you want to do, and we are all gonna follow you. You know, into the dark. Like sometimes there's like a person that's like, I'm gonna do something crazy, and then everyone's like, all right, we're in this car together. Like, let's go. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know, like sometimes I think we get really attached to these characters, or we like get really in the mindset of like preservation and safety.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think that like the fun stuff that you want to be like, we're playing this game for a reason. You know what I mean? Like, this is a game. This is an opportunity for us to escape. It's an opportunity for us to have fun. So like taking chances and taking risks, that's where like the fun moments and the memorable ones I think come from a lot of times, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And not just in the instance of like I'm going to do something dumb and dangerous, like also in the instances of like I'm going to say something as a player character that I wouldn't say in real life, you know? Like that's also
Mm-hmm.
taking a risk, you
Yeah.
know? Uh, I'm going to use a voice for this character. That's taking a risk. Like I'm going to actually role play out the scene rather than just being like, "Oh yeah, I said what he said, what the DM said." I tell the party that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like
Yeah,
I just
that's
don't
one of
think
those
that.
things that's sometimes a little tough, right? Because like I want to. Sometimes I'll role play out a scene, and then halfway through it, I'll be like, I'm missing some of the things that the DM told me, but I don't want to. I'm not trying to keep them. I'm
Yeah.
just not saying them right. So at some
Well,
point, I'm like, I do tell you everything, but this is how I.
and if the party's paying attention, like they can fill in the gaps, right?
Yeah.
So unless there's like something big that you're intentionally not going to tell them, you know.
Right.
But I think you could say like, yeah, I say all that and I leave that out. Yeah. Excuse me. I just don't know that like many memories are made by avoiding the danger, you know.
That's true. Yeah, I think that's true. But also on the flip side of that, that doesn't necessarily mean like always try to pickpocket the king, right?
Yes. Yeah. and I should clarify, I suppose, because like I agree, like don't do something stupid or like, well, it's just what my character would do, or like nothing that's at the detriment of the fun of the people around you. Because like that's the ultimate purpose of this, is to have fun. Like we're taking time out of our lives to like pursue this hobby. Um, but I think that like, hey, we are playing an adventure game where we are literally putting our players' lives at risks, at risk to discover things or whatever. So there is a balance, I suppose, between those things, but like they just feel like different things. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think if you are still pursuing the common goal of the party, and that means you do have to pickpocket the king, then that's fine, right? But but if that's just like, I'm just being a jackass, like, okay, that's not fun.
Yeah, that's like it's one of those weird like balance things where, yeah, that's, I mean, if that's what you and your party were like, we need to do this,
Right.
and we need to do it carefully, then yeah, do it. But if it's like, oh, we just met this guy, he could hold a lot of sway in the way we're treated in the near future, I'm gonna punch him in the face. Why?
I'm chaotic neutral. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that's something that I'll do regularly too, is that like, if I feel like I have an action that I'm going to take as a player that has the potential to be like final in nature, I am going to wait to do it until I feel like everyone else has exhausted their potential path forward.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's like, this is something that only I am engaged with, or it's like like this is my story beat, I'm gonna do this,
Yeah.
Like the other day, like we had an instance when it was like a week 2 weeks ago that we played. Joe's character Saturn is like essentially having this conversation with a hag that had something to do with his mom's potential harm or demise or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And like it didn't take too long before he was like, all right, I'm gonna kill this person. I'm like, yeah, you are. Like, freaking let's F this person up. And it's like, I didn't feel like I was shorted, because it's like, yeah, this is your moment, so like you run with it, dude.
Mm-hmm.
But if like we as a party are like interacting with this thing and there's not like a personalized element to it, it's just like, I would like to have a chance to maybe try my spell to get through here, instead of you just like, I'm a barbarian, I rage and I punch.
Yeah,
So,
for sure. So that's like, yeah, that's kind of what I thought when I saw risk taking as a topic. As far as character, well, we've talked a little bit about this, but as far as character development, when you write a backstory, do you ever have like specific scenes in mind that you think will come up or that you think should come up?
I think it's helpful if you give your DM something that has a conflict involved. And I mean, like, sometimes that's really easy. Like, for example, the one that I had, like, I basically wrote it in there that this tragic event happens to my family.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, I think you could give a backstory that's like, yeah, I was, like, raised in upper middle class suburbia and, like, had a really good life and things are good and I just want to, like, get out. It's like, okay, well, the conflict is probably going to be like, you were never exposed to this. Like, how do you deal with that? Like, captive privilege? Like, how? Like, that would be an interesting story to be like. I've thought about like having some kind of semi-joke character, but like semi-serious. Like, yeah, I'm just so sick of like the mundane life that my parents offered me, so I'm gonna be this super edge lord that like I get out there and stuff. It's like, yeah, but you're actually not that. I don't know.
That's very. That sounds very much like Tyrion Darrington. That was one of Sam Riegel played two characters in campaign 1,
Hmm.
and one of them like left the party for a short time, and his second one was this character name. He was an artificer named Tyrion Darrington, and he
Oh,
was a like from wealth. Just I don't want to exactly what you said, pretty much.
yeah.
And it was funny the way that his character interacted with the party was very much as you would expect. Like he played it well. Like he was like scared whenever things actually happened, and then
Yeah.
was like afterwards he was writing about it in his in his memoir about how brave he was, kind of thing.
Hmm.
It was pretty funny. It was good.
So I like in that instance, like there doesn't need to be an inciting incident necessarily, like a huge dramatic trauma moment, but I think like you asked the question about like are there scenes that you want to play out? I
Hmm.
think if there are, you could talk to your DM about it, but I don't know. I would never want to give my DM like here's the script, you know.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And
But I can definitely see, like, especially if it's someone that you had in your backstory, like at some point I want to have this scene where I confront this person about this thing. Now,
yeah,
what I have learned about it since since the campaign started may influence the way that happens, right? But I definitely want to have like that direct confrontation.
yeah.
So I feel like that's fair.
I think it is too. I think it's fine. I mean, like that. I don't know if you would write anything that wouldn't result in that. You know,
Yeah, I mean it just
I guess.
depends on, like, it's possible, like as a DM you might be thinking like maybe for you the an interesting part of that would be like uh this person that you had this confrontation with dies before you're able to resolve it, and that is the conflict. But if the
Yeah.
player's thinking something, that they want to have that conflict, then having that discussion could be important.
Like your first campaign, like
Hmm.
I came in really late into it, and you guys were semi close to the end.
Yeah.
Like I can't remember all the details of it, but there was conflict that I wrote into my story that like because of the nature of where we were at, like we're never going to get back to it, you know.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah, I
think that
remember
that's
because
fine.
you gave me that backstory, and I was like, "Oh, this is really cool. I like that you're doing this, but given that this campaign is so far in, I don't know how much of this we're going to be able to get to." And I told you, like,
Yeah.
if we do another one and you give me a backstory like this, I'll get to this stuff.
Right, 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 right.
But yeah, I remember thinking that
Um,
when you gave me that, I was like, "Oh man, I don't think I'm going to be able to
how
get to that."
I've got a question about this that I've been thinking about. Like, how do you, let's say you've got a player or group of players that are risk averse,
Hmm.
like they are unintentionally or intentionally going out of their way to avoid the conflict. Like, I feel like, again, like you can't tell these stories without conflict or opposition, you know?
Hmm.
Like, that's there's always going to be that in these stories. Like, your protagonists are working uphill against something, you know?
Hmm.
There has to be a conflict. How do you work? How do you deal with circumstance where you feel like, okay, my players are doing everything possible to avoid the like quote unquote dangerous circumstance? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Um.
I feel like in our campaign there was a point where it was almost like, okay, guys, why don't we just like go back to the city and play like like Craftsman Simulator because we were like going out of our way to like try to not do something dangerous. You know what I mean?
Hmm. And that's one of those things, like, it depending on how urgent it is, right? If it's something that is building, then I just let it continue to build, and it's just going to be a bigger problem when it finally does get dealt with. But if it's
Yeah.
something that's urgent, I think that you can do a couple things. You can either essentially have it win, right? in which case the campaign becomes very different, and your basically your PCs are always playing from behind against whatever stuff you throw at them, and it can be coming for them rather than waiting for them to come to it. Which is potentially more threatening. Or you can have it be like whatever it was succeeded and got big, and as it came in, then like these other bigger entities like governments or whatever are trying to deal with it, but maybe they're failing, and it's something that basically went from urgent to emergent, right? And in which case, again, you can make it more difficult or whatever. And it just depends on your players too. Like if they are, it's one of those things where, because I try as a DM to sort of give an idea for how dangerous a thing is, which is hard to do without being like, no, you shouldn't do this yet.
Right.
You should get a couple levels, then come back and do this. So it's just a thing you gotta sort of play by ear.
Because I feel like there's this balancing act between like, I want you guys to feel like you do have agency, but also like D&D is a combat game, and I've developed all of these encounters, and you keep running away from all of them. So I'm about to force you to do it. Like, you're getting robbed at knife point. Like, what are you gonna do now? Are you just gonna run away? Because this guy's gonna kill you.
Yeah, and that's like a sort of a thing where now I've forgotten what I was gonna say. Like, let's see if I can get it back here. If they're continually avoiding, I guess it's like are your players so afraid of character death that they're not willing to play the game? And if that's the case, maybe well, obviously you just need to have a talk about it, but if that is the way that you talk about it and that turns out to be the case, maybe that's just not your table.
Yeah, for sure. Because I just that does seem risky. We could, maybe we shouldn't do that. It's like, but I want to. Like, this is the encounter that's been prepared for us tonight. Like, I want to try that because, like, it's like going through the theme park and like skipping all the rides. You know what I mean? And again, I don't mean
that's
like
exactly what I do. I go to the Midway, I don't do any of the rides. But yeah, that's a delicate balance, because the DM, like, if they're putting effort into it, they've prepared something that is supposed to happen, and they don't want their players to feel like that's what's quote unquote supposed to happen. They're supposed to give them a good reason to choose it, right? But if they don't choose it, and you're like, I didn't put any thought into something else, I guess I'm gonna have to make it up, and then it feels very watered down or shallow, and it's like, well, that's what you chose, I guess.
I'm gonna put what I had worked on in the binder for another time, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like, I go back to this moment in this current campaign that we're in. Like, we had a character who hated goblins, and like we were walking through a forest, and there was a big goblin camp. And he stuck to his guns and was like, I'm gonna go fight those things. And like, there were a couple of us that were like, it seems like a lot, like maybe we should sneak around this and not encounter this. And like, after that, like, he went on, he fought solo, he died solo. Like, I think back to that moment regularly, and I'm just like, I think I was gone that night, but like, dude, like, what are we doing? Like, if we're not gonna like get on the ride, like, what are we waiting for? Like, and part of it too is like, I don't think Isaac's developed one of these campaigns that's like super brutal and like punishing. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean that's sort of that's another thing you got to sort of try to deal with as a player. Is like, am I meant? Like, is the DM giving me things that I'm supposed to run from occasionally?
Yeah.
Or is the DM giving me things that they think that I can handle always? And I don't want to do that either. Like, as a DM, I don't want to give you things that I think that I want you to think that you can handle always, right? Because then there's
Right.
no risk.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it depends on the table. I get that. I have told in my campaigns that I'm running, I've told my players, look, I will likely not. Death is possible for sure, but I am not going to do a campaign where it is likely. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like I don't have a ton of time, and I'm putting a lot of time that I do have into this, and I don't want you guys to have developed these cool backstories and for it to just be like, well, you made a pretty dumb decision by fighting this group of bad, like, cojones. Like, guess you're all gonna die, and it doesn't matter, so roll up a new character. Because I feel like, oh, well, all this, like, work I put into, like, weaving your crap into the backstory, or into the framework of the world, I now have to throw away.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
but
That's
I know some people
that's the
really
thing.
like those kind of games, though. I know some people are like, yeah, I love, like, tearing up character sheets every other session. Not me, but
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't mind character death. It certainly feels
yeah,
worse if I put a lot into the backstory and don't feel like the character's story is over yet.
yeah. And I mean, character death will probably mean that most of the time. But I, I want the dice and the decisions to determine their death. Not, I want to feel like that was not me as a DM that did that to them.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
definitely.
Like,
Uh, yeah, when you make an encounter, you don't want it to be like it's tough because especially with people, especially whenever you have people who play mechanically very well and people who are either new or just don't play mechanically very well in the same party, it is much
yeah,
more difficult to balance encounters around
yeah,
because if it's too light, then you're going to have one or two characters like wiping everything. And
yeah,
if it's too heavy, then like your weaker characters may die.
right, yeah,
So it's tough to balance around in an ideal table. You want everyone to be mechanically around the same I guess skill, I guess would be the
yeah,
word for lack of a better word.
right.
So
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
it's
sometimes I feel like there's not much you can do about that. Like my in-person table, like there's two brand new people that are playing, and one of them got knocked out in a fight that I didn't think was going to be a problem at all, and then they just like dumpstered like the boss of the cave or whatever
mm-hmm.
because they got some really lucky rolls. So it's just like, man, it's hard to plan around statistical variance and
Oh, it's
luck.
so hard. It's like whenever here
But,
recently you guys went and fought the big guy at the portal outside of
yeah.
Darien.
How hard was that guy actually?
Well, he
Like,
was gonna be harder if he got a second turn.
nope. We made sure of that.
He got one thing off and it did some damage, but like he didn't get
Yeah.
another shot. He didn't get another chance. He got
Yeah.
blown up.
Yeah. You got to work in some
And
legendary resistances or
he
something, I
wasn't a
think.
legendary guy, you know. He was
Yeah.
just higher up, but he wasn't.
Yep.
He wasn't a
Not
huge
that
guy.
high.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so. Yeah, I
'Cause-
just think that like when it comes to development, like there's got to be opposition and there's got to be risk, and there's times where it's just like, you know what, we're playing a game, like do it, like do the fun thing, you know what I mean? Like I, in my life, am careful and measured and considerate. I want to come to like Monday nights or whatever and like kind of throw that away and be something else completely. Because it's just like, well, this makes sense. And so I feel like as long as I'm not ruining the fun for other people, like as long as the fun is maintained, like I want to make some zany choices or some decisions that I wouldn't normally do. And I want to like see a character through with some growth moments and things like that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I want to see how they're going to respond to these traumas, these acts of violence, these challenges, you know? And like, when do I feel like my character would triumph and like overcome? And when do I think that they'll fall or like develop kind of a new quirky habit or something as a result? Like, I don't know if you've ever played Darkest Dungeon at all,
I have not.
but there's like a stress / fear mechanic to it, and it's great because like, in addition to having resources like hit points, there is a resource of like stress, and if you reach, there's a soft cap at 100 and there's a hard cap of 200. If you surpass the soft cap at 100, there's like a majority % chance that something negative will happen, where it's just like they take on a certain status effect, like terrified or like overwhelmed or anxious or something like that, and they do dumb or bad things in battle or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Selfish. And then the hard cap is if they hit 200, there's a chance that like their heart will explode because they're overstressed, you know? But then there's like, in between their like dungeon delving or whatever, they can take on these like attributes, and some of them are positive and some of them are negative. Like some of them are like, you know, when you get back to town, like the only way that they're going to relieve stress is by going to the bar and drinking or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that with this kind of game sometimes. It's just like, yeah, like I think good things are happening, but I also think it's interesting to be like, oh, I've discovered that like my character is a bit of a drunkard. Like they brought it up tonight. I was like, yeah, Jace has a problem. And I've never thought of him as like being that guy, but he is either like a problematic drunk or just like a young, dumb frat kid that needs to grow out of this, because he's making some big boy decisions that, and for the most part, have been pretty good, but so
You bring up like the mechanics thing, and that's something that I've been looking into more recently.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it was an interview with Brendan Lee Mulligan, who's said basically along the lines of, I like running 5e for narrative stories specifically because there aren't mechanics for the narrative part of it. And it's because that's the part that I have an idea of what I want to do with, but I don't necessarily want to get creative about combat, and so I'm glad that those rules are set.
Yeah.
So that's, and I've thought about like well, why don't I want to try a different system? And it's like, well, it's because I don't want learning a new system to get in the way of the game itself or the story, right? Like, oh, well, you didn't roll your whatever for talking to this guy, and now he hates you, so I guess that's that. And two, because absolutely. I like for the narrative part, I want to be able to go more on a feel, because like I feel like when you get too many rules, it takes away like some of the nuance.
Yeah.
So like if every time you speak to an NPC, the DM has to like keep track of a reputation bar, right? It gets bogged down. Whereas if the DM just knows that this is approximately how the NPC feels about the characters, and if the characters come in and give him good news, it's gonna it's gonna go better, versus bad news is gonna go worse, as opposed to, oh well, the bar says we're here, so good news only moves at one tick. Bad news only moves at one tick. So yeah, that's a thing that I've been looking into, and I agree that I don't want to bog down the narrative with a bunch of mechanics. I'm open to like trying a few mechanics out, if for specific things, especially if it's, character specific.
Yeah. Yeah, like it is kind of interesting because, like, I don't know, what would you say? Like 95% of the rules for D&D 5e is like strictly just combat.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's a reason why that takes the longest. Like, combat's supposed to be like 6-second turns, but it takes an hour to get through it in real play time.
Yep.
But yeah, I think it's interesting how much it leaves for interpretation for the players and the DM when it does come to those moments that are outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think, your example from earlier, like if you do want to like inject a couple of mechanics, I think as long as everybody's in the know-how, it can be kind of cool. Like, so your claustrophobia mechanic, or like in campaign 2 of Critical Role, like whenever Caleb set fire to somebody, like
Yeah, that is roughly where I got that from. I was like, that's kind of a cool thing.
There was in one of the Dimension 20 campaigns, there was a character who was a little bit of an alcoholic, and there was a moment where like the example, I think she ran into a circumstance where she ran into the other woman with like her ex or whatever,
Okay.
And afterwards, Brennan's like, "Yeah, you need to roll a wisdom saving throw because it's like we need to know if Sophie needs to go get a drink after that." And the player was like, "No, I want to go look at that thing," and she rolled low, and she's like, "Oh," and he's like, "Yeah, Sophie needs a drink." So instead of like pursuing the interest, it's like, yeah, that's kind of cool. But like that's one roll that takes like 2 seconds, and it's like, yeah, looks like we're going down a completely different story right now compared to what you were hoping to do. And that's part of like, I think that's interesting. I think that's cool. I think like it's fun to like bring up those ideas because I think it's like, yeah, it does allow you to still inject a little bit of the randomness and spontaneity of a dice roll to how things are going to move forward,
Yeah. And to a lesser degree, not in campaign 2 of Critical Role.
Yeah.
She drank a lot, and we didn't find out why until much later in the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
But there was an actual reason for it, and it was funny I thought it was funny. There was one time, because she would get drunk before almost any fight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was one fight where I think like anyone standing within so many feet of the enemy was frightened, and he was like, "But I'm drunk, and because I'm drunk, I am immune to frighten." And I was like, "That's great."
That was so amazing. I forgot about that. I forgot about that. Have you ever, like, like if you're looking at the books or whatever, like, have you ever rolled on the tables that they give for like character development kind of stuff, like bonds, flaws, or ideals? Yeah,
I haven't.
I have read through them and I've borrowed from some of them, and I'm like, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it would be kind of interesting just to like randomly go with that and then play your character as that. I don't want to cede, I personally don't want to cede that much control over the circumstance to just like the randomness, but at the same time it'd be kind of cool to like layer in like, okay, I've got this thing really fleshed out, but let's add in one more like bond, ideal, and flaw from the tables. Because that could be like that's another interesting way where you can let the dice inject a little bit into,
Yeah, and reading through those, I'm always a little like, they seem, well, I mean, they're on purpose, I guess, a little shallow. Mm-hmm. And the way that you read them, I think, if I were to take them as, as the rules suggest, I would have to take a flaw and then like write into the backstory why that flaw is the way it is, so that I have something to feel about it, rather than just, oh, that's a rule that I do.
Yeah. I mean, most of the time you take it as like this is an inspiration point. Like,
yeah,
how does this influence the entirety of my character? So.
Yeah. And I read them. I'm like, I'd rather just go what I have written down already.
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying about like the interest of taking a random one and seeing if you can work it in interestingly.
Yeah, I think that I don't know. It is some of them I feel like none of these apply. But then there's times where I'm just like, you know, the people that made this game, they took the time, and some of it was really, really good. Like it'd be interesting to kind of look through, you know. Like, you know, I sometimes feel like I'm playing a wild magic sorcerer right now in your campaign, and I sometimes feel like that is similar to some of these moments where it's just like, yeah, these wild magic moments could occur and influence the entirety of the moment, good or bad. And it's like not a decision that I'm making.
Mm-hmm.
And so it feels like one step away from kind of what we're talking about, where it's like these non-combat elements, these risks that like are dictating what's happening. And
Yeah.
it is almost borderline feels bad, but I don't know.
Yeah, I certainly can see that. Yeah, so it's just as with all things, balance is good. Finding out where it works and where it doesn't for you and your players.
Yeah.
I think that's good. We've covered a lot.
Yeah.
I think that
This is a
I've said
very
all the
like
things I wanted to say.
amorphous topic. This is a
Yes,
difficult one.
it is.
It's not very concrete, but like I think that it's important as you're developing your character or if you're working with your player characters as they build their characters, like identifying those milestones that should lead to like a reaction. You know, it could be
Mm-hmm.
good, it could be bad, but it should alter the flow of your character in some way. Maybe minor. And again, like I said, maybe positive or maybe negative, but like I think that that's important.
Yeah, and to have those conversations if you have a specific thing you want to do, because like I think I prefer to give DM what my player knows,
Mm-hmm.
and then be surprised by whatever happens. But
Yeah.
I can see the merit in if a player has a very specific thing that they want to do, at least like a specific scene or something that they want to have happen. You can
Yeah.
work around that, but it's just
Yeah.
all about the conversations you have, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree 1,000% with that. So,
All right, well, good luck everyone making your next characters, deciding
Yeah.
how they will develop and grow.
yes.
All right,
Yes.
well, I think we covered everything, so
Yeah.
thanks for chatting with me. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
See you later. Bye.